And according to Edmunds, the latest statistic is the average car purchased today is almost $50,000. You ever wonder how we got to the point where you can't no longer afford a brand new car? There's a few reasons why that is. Things are changing, and it's not just in your mind. When you walk into the car dealership, you're seeing these prices that seem to be out of control. So you're not alone in the idea of the affordability crisis taking a hold and tearing away at your shirt sleeves, at your shirt collars, and the ability to buy a brand new car is becoming further and far between. But there's a multitude of reasons why this is going on. And I'm going to get right to the point. So first of all, let's talk about the very psychology of the car purchase. The psychology means that they keep pushing the boundaries, whether it's luxury cars, whether it's everyday cars, Hondas, Toyotas, Mercedes, BMW, doesn't matter. You see these small incremental changes. You know, you walk into the dealership last year, you probably saw that base model going for about $38,000. Then you go and visit this vehicle this year and you see all of a sudden it's at $41,000. What gives? Well, every single year these incremental changes, and it's almost death by a thousand cuts. So this is psychology that a lot of these dealers and OEMs are implementing. Whether there's true cost add-ons at the factory level or not, they're adding increases step by step. And this psychology has you believing in small incremental changes rather than one big massive step, that this seems to be okay. How did we get to go from up to 25-30% increases in the last 10 years? It's this small incremental changes, this psychology shift, as it were, that we're starting to see by a lot of these manufacturers in a lot of these vehicles. They're doing it by a little bit. Have you ever gone to McDonald's and start to see, you know, it seemed like only 5 years ago a McDonald's Happy Meal or a McDonald's meal was about $5, and now it's $13 Canadian. How did we get here? Well, it's because it seemed like every month I'd go grab my snack, and it seemed like that meal was up another 15 cents, 18 cents, 25 cents, 5 cents. But every single month it went up, up, up. And then you look back over a period of time, and it's not about inflation, because a lot of these car manufacturers are increasing these costs outside of the scope of the inflationary increases, which clearly are only about 30% in the last 10 years, but the vast majority of these vehicles are going up 35, 40, 45%. So there's more going on than just inflation. There's another element that adds to these prices that have gone up to over $50,000 just for your garden variety vehicle. A lot of it is now mandates, CAFE standards, you know, a lot of these environmental standards, and a lot of these other standards create a lot of these manufacturers that they have to start putting in sensors and driver assistance programs. So essentially, it's the tech tax is what we're talking about. And a lot of manufacturers are doing it just because they feel like doing it. There's a lot of technology going in a lot of these vehicles that doesn't necessarily need to be there, but a lot of it does. And things like backup cameras have to be put in every single vehicle since the last few handful of years. Every vehicle is actually mandated to have a backup camera. Then there's all kinds of other driver assistance programs, sensors all over the place. And almost every car these days is overloaded with sensors. I mean, you look inside of these vehicles today, you've got sensors, you've got warning, you know, lane departure warning, pedestrian warning systems. You've got all kinds of sensors telling you how to drive and how to drive safely. But in doing so, we've sort of lost grip with the availability or the ability to actually drive and manipulate our own cars. We're heavily relying on this autonomous technology, a technology that we're paying for, whether you like it or not, and whether these manufacturers agree that it's forced upon them or whether they're doing it voluntarily. The entire industry is step changing these incremental changes, updates, these technology updates and changes that are forcing you and your neighbor over there to, when they buy their new car, that they have to have all of this technology because it's safer, because it makes the vehicle easier, more autonomous. That's what we all want, right? Not really, but that's what we're getting. So a lot of this technology comes at a cost. And because of that cost, because of these changes, these extra sensors, these extra features, it just means that we're paying a lot more money. Every single year, new tech, new discoveries in the tech industry means that a lot of those land in the next new vehicle that you purchase. Of course, that all starts to add up. Extra wiring, extra modules, extra sensors, extra harnesses, and of course the research and development to get it there. Ultimately, we're overloaded with the tech tax. Another impact to why these vehicles are getting more and more expensive comes down to these parts, this part. If this thing breaks, that's going to cost you some money. Maybe you need another part. Maybe this component here fails. Maybe it develops an issue. Maybe these filters that you put in here for maintenance, maybe you can't get those anymore because they've been discontinued, or maybe getting them from the factory becomes more and more difficult. That's right, the supply chain is having a major impact. And what's going on right now, we're hearing it more and more and more, things like trade disputes, tariffs, taxes, that all adds costs. Now, we haven't heard a whole lot of this going on up until the last couple of years, but that is having an impact. So supply chain, expensive parts, but even back in 2020, 2021, it was actually sort of difficult to get your hands on a lot of components. Why? Supply chain. If you want to even put batteries, a lot of hybrid or electric vehicles were very expensive because a lot of those minerals and those materials that go in those batteries are expensive and hard to get access to. Of course, certain markets, if there's trade disputes with those certain markets and you gain access to get those materials, that's going to drive up the prices. And it actually has. Same with a lot of these components, particularly European vehicles. Have you heard lately Porsche, just because the cost of doing business now, the cost increase and taxation applied to a lot of their vehicles because they're not built in certain places, now they're seeing an increase. Porsche just raised their prices on their base 911 up to $120,000 at the beginning of the year. And then recently they just added another 10 grand. So now base price of a 911 is up to $130,000 plus all the extras. But it doesn't begin and end with that. That's just a fundamental baseline, a reason. All these vehicles are the sum of their parts, more or less, right? So with part supply chain getting choked out, vehicles getting more expensive naturally is a big reason because of the supply chain limitations, extra taxation. And what we're finding is now it's just harder to get parts, harder to get components. Of course, unless you're driving a Chevy or a Toyota or a Chevy or a Ford, for example, some of those vehicles, supply chain's less of an impact, but don't kid yourself. A lot of those parts still get imported from other countries, in which case there's still taxation, which recently has come to fruition. So we're starting to see a lot more taxes, trade disputes, geopolitical disputes, and things that are actually having an impact on the price of the vehicle, price of the parts, and as a result, you're paying more each and every day. And the changing of the sticker price and the OEM pricing on these new vehicles just keeps climbing to compensate for the increases in the supply chain. So not everything comes down to the manufacturer. Sometimes it's at the dealer end. And a lot of the dealer dynamics is driving prices up too. We're seeing a lot of this popularity. Have you seen the new Corvette ZR1 XX? Or even when this new C8 Corvette came out in the first place, it was like hotcakes. They were selling like they were going out of style. As a result, what you had were dealers taking advantage of hungry customers. And so they were charging market adjustment fees. They were gouging customers in so many ways. While a manufacturer was only able to get so many vehicles out to market, we saw manufacturers just ripping customers off. We saw it in Nissan with the Z car. We've seen a lot of these vehicles go through these ups and downs, market adjustment fees. Of course, there's a profitability when manufacturers or the salespeople specifically at those dealerships are driven to sell extended warranties, upgrades for materials, putting on extra, protection packages, paint protection film, undercoating, floor mats, you name it, key fob protection, rim dent protection packages. You want to protect that nice paint job, but that's going to come at a cost. And so those extra add-ons, that's not something we used to hear about 15 or 20 years ago, but this is something now that a lot of the dealers are taking advantage of the consumers now. Another major impact with the dealer dynamics is the direct to the customer sales experience. Most people just traditionally, and that's typically how the industry works, is the manufacturer sells or sends the vehicle to the dealer. The dealer then has to pay sort of a monthly cost, a holding cost, if you will, to keep those vehicles. So they don't buy them outright from the manufacturer, but they pay a monthly. And that monthly cost costs the dealers. The dealers want to get those vehicles gone, but there's ultimately, those costs get transferred through to somewhere. Somebody's paying for that. So if the dealers are paying for that, you better not kid yourself. Somebody else is going to pay, and it's usually going to be the consumer. So ultimately, what that's going to mean in the long term is you're going to pay more dealing with the dealership. You see, you get what the gist. You see, what some manufacturers are now contemplating going direct from the manufacturer to the consumer, ordering it online. And that ultimately would cut out that middleman, which is the dealership. A lot of people hate dealing with dealers. Some people, there are a lot of great reputable dealers that just want to be fair, but ultimately they are still a middleman. They were still taking a cut of the profits. Even if they want to be as fair and profitable to them, but fair to you as the consumer, the fact remains is there's still another person in the food chain. They have to pay for those dealerships. They not only have to get that vehicle covered, so those monthly charges, floor plan costs that they have to pay to keep those vehicles on there. Of course, they're going to be trying to rush those vehicles off. 30 to 60 days are going to want them gone. But more importantly, they pay the salesperson's going to take their cut. The general manager's got to take a cut. They have to keep the lights on. Well, the utilities, the power, the heat, the water is going to take a cost. What about the mechanics? Sure, they can charge books, but it doesn't always work that way. They have administrative costs. They have cleanup. They have, even maintenance. You want to cut the grass outside the dealership? That's going to cost money. They have to pay the maintenance people to do that. What if the broken lock at the front doorway isn't working anymore? They have to pay some shop to come out and fix that. You get the gist. They're essentially working on a fixed budget. And that's where they're going to have to take their money. They have to get their money somewhere, and that money's coming out of you some way or another. So the sales directly to the consumer is ultimately cutting out that middleman, but very few manufacturers are doing that today. And currently, really, Tesla is one of the few that does it. And they're able to make those adjustments directly to the bottom line, whereas the dealers definitely want a big cut. Another major reason why a lot of these vehicles are getting so expensive comes down to the design and engineering. I mean, you think back 1974, what did the average vehicle look like? Carbureted V6, V8 engine, very simple, 3-speed, 4-speed automatic transmission, a big piece of tin. And a lot of us love those very basic, simple vehicles. But that's the fact. They were very basic. There was less into them. There's less research, less development costs in the basic fundamentals, the drivetrains. Today, you've got engineers, whether we like it or whether we don't like it, they are more efficient, they're more powerful, they're faster, and there's a lot more structure built around a vehicle to make them safer. So the way they drive and the way they handle, as well as just the safety that it keeps us in these cocoons, costs time, engineering costs. These direct injection engines with turbocharging and supercharging and hybrid drivetrains, whether we like that or not, those costs are going through the roof. This isn't just technology. This is the way vehicles are developed, and they're a lot safer. But those features come at a cost. So we're paying for that. And there's no question, you look at a vehicle from the 70s, even the 80s, they aren't half the vehicle they are today. Back then, you'd pay by the pound. Today, you're paying for a lot of that design and the precision of these vehicles. You remember back in the day, you had those old carbureted vehicles. I had this old Chevy back in 1981. It had a 350. It was a great truck, but you know what? If it was minus 10, you'd have to pump it once, then crank it. If it was minus 20, you have to pump it twice and then crank it. If it was minus 30, you have to pump it 3 times and then crank it. It was a little fussy, a little temperamental. You'd crank it, it would start to run and sputter, and then it would run, and then you'd be good. Carbureted engines were simpler. Engines in general were simpler, big hunk of iron. But a lot of those back in the leaded fuel days just didn't last very long either. They weren't the best designs. Things have gotten better to a point, some would argue till about 2010, 2012 is kind of when we saw our peak in terms of overall longevity. That we can discuss on another video, but ultimately these designs have costed major price increases and price creep over the years. There's this constant enhancement of better and safer drivetrains, better, safer vehicles that can tolerate collisions a lot better. Like it or not, that is exactly some of the major cost increases and the reasons for it. There's another big reason why these vehicles continue to go up in price. Now, if you go online, you can do a US adjusted for inflation calculator. That's right. These prices are going up as well because of inflation, core inflation. Food is going up, housing's going up. That new pair of sneakers you just bought just went up. That new cell phone went up. A lot of it's because of various reasons. Geopolitical, sometimes it's trade costs, taxation, rare materials, better engineering. There's a pile of reasons, but ultimately, taxation through inflation is a big reason. And inflation has caused prices to go up. Just look online, grab the Google, go US inflation adjustment calculator, and you'll find it. So in the last 10 years, you look, the average has gone up about 32 to 33%. If you took a vehicle back in 2014 or 2015, and you look at a vehicle in 2025, the natural increase actually should have gone up by about a third. Yeah, that's about 32% is the increased cost because of just due to inflationary increases alone. And so a big reason why these prices continue to climb is just core inflation. Now, most of us, we aren't keeping up. Our income, our paychecks don't keep up with inflation. We know that. I know that. We all know that. So what we're looking at more or less is, people are seeing their increases in pay going up from 2.5%, 3%. If we're lucky, if we've been good behaved, young people at our jobs and the boss seems to like us, we might get those increases that look like 2.5%, 3%. Unfortunately, inflationary increases year over year is more like 3.5%, 4.5%. So it's running outside of the scope of what our paychecks are paying us. So unfortunately, we'll never be able to keep up, and we are losing the ability to hold on for dear life, essentially, for the cost of inflationary increases. But that is an impact. Inflation is one of the biggest impacts as well to these increased costs of these new vehicles. But again, as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to share the video. Really need a little kick in the rump. Would really be appreciated. Hope to see each and every one in the next one, everybody. And you all have a lovely day. See you then. Bye-bye.